The most embarrassing Roman emperor deaths. You think Roman emperors had it good. Absolute power, armies at their command, people literally carving their faces into coins, priests sacrificing animals in their honor, the toga, the laurel wreath, the little guys fanning them with big leaves. And then one of them dies in a swamp. A literal swamp, like an actual physical soggy swamp in Bulgaria. Decius. Full name, Gaius Messius Quintus Decius, which is a mouthful, so we're just calling him Decius because we're not doing that. Ruled from 249 to 251 AD. 2 years. 2. My gym membership lasted longer than this man's reign, and I stopped going after 3 weeks. Now Decius was actually trying to be a decent emperor. He wanted to restore traditional Roman values, bring back the old gods, make Rome feel like Rome again. Respectable stuff, good intentions, gold star for effort. The problem is that the Goths had a different agenda. Their agenda was specifically and personally to make Decius die in a marsh. And they succeeded spectacularly. At the Battle of Abritus in 251 AD, somewhere in what is now Bulgaria, the exact location is unknown. Maybe everybody wants to forget this event. A Gothic king named Sneva lured the Roman army into boggy, swampy, absolutely rancid terrain. Roman military formations were legendary. Tight lines, disciplined shields, the whole thing. You know what Roman formations are not good in? A swamp. They completely fell apart. Decius died there, in the mud. They never even recovered his body. The first Roman emperor who died in battle against a foreign enemy was lost in a Bulgarian wetland. Here's the thing that genuinely gets me. Someone at some point had to look at that terrain and go, yeah, the emperor's fine, let's keep going. That person had one job. One job. Gordian III. Sweet, doomed, 13-year-old Gordian III. Emperor in 238 AD at the age of 13. 13. You know what I was doing at 13? Losing at video games and eating cereal for dinner. Gordian III was managing the largest empire on Earth at 13. Now, to be fair, he wasn't really managing it. His father-in-law, a competent general named Decius, was essentially running the show while Gordian stood there looking official. And that was fine. That was working. Then Decius died. Illness, some say. Poison, others say. Such things were very common in Rome back then, at least not anymore. Rome was already approaching its period of decline and was living through its final days. So now Gordian, still a teenager, is suddenly very much alone. He ends up marching against the Persians. Everyone had to fight the Persians eventually. It was practically a Roman rite of passage at this point, and dies during the campaign in 244 at the age of 19. The official story is battle. His successor, a man named Philip the Arab, said it was battle. Philip, who conveniently became emperor immediately afterward. Philip, who then made a pretty embarrassing peace deal with Persia and rushed straight home. Philip, who had literally every possible reason to just quietly help the situation along. And on top of that, the Persians also claimed they killed Gordian. So now you've got two different people taking credit for murdering a 19-year-old. The whole thing is murkier than the swamp Decius died in and twice as depressing. What happened to Valerian is, in my opinion, the worst of all. Ruled from 253 to 260, and the empire at this point was kind of a disaster. Historians literally call this period the crisis of the 3rd century, and they are not being dramatic. Barbarians everywhere, plague, economic collapse, the full starter pack. Valerian looks at all of this and goes, you know what the real problem is? Persia. Specifically, the Sassanid king Shapur I, who was, I'll give him this, genuinely terrifying. built different, that guy. So Valerian marches east, big army, very confident energy, and at the Battle of Edessa, or Carhae, depending on which ancient source you trust, and I've read like 4 different accounts and they all disagree, so great, something goes wrong. Valerian got captured, a sitting Roman emperor. Another Roman emperor who relied solely on his large army and set out without knowing anything about Persian geography, taken prisoner by the enemy. That had never happened before in all of Roman history, not once. And Shapur was not quiet about it. He had victory carvings made, plural, all over Persia. There's one at a place called Nakshe Rostam that still exists today. You can actually go look at it, showing Shapur enormous and triumphant with Valerian literally kneeling in front of him. There are accounts, heavily debated accounts, that Shapur used Valerian as a human mounting stool to get on his horse. Every day. Like a little stepping stool made of Rome. And when Valerian eventually died in Persian captivity, some sources claim he was skinned and stuffed afterward. I genuinely hope that part isn't true. But the fact that people heard Shapur stuffed Valerian like a taxidermy project and went, yeah, sounds right, very on brand, tells you everything about the vibes of this particular situation. Julian the Apostate was another Roman emperor who declared war on the Persians and was killed in 363 AD. This one I find genuinely a little tragic. He was the last pagan Roman emperor. He came after Constantine had made Christianity the dominant religion, and he personally tried to reverse that, brought back the old temples, the old sacrifices, the whole thing. Christians of his time called him the Apostate, meaning someone who abandoned the faith. Julian did not appear to be particularly bothered by this nickname. To some historians, he was a smart guy, a philosopher, a writer, a capable general, one of the more interesting emperors intellectually. And he launched this massive campaign against Persia in 363. Yes, still the Persians, still, Romans never learned. The Persians were basically the final boss at this game. Got deep into Persian territory. And then Julian burned his own supply fleet, his own boats, on purpose. There are multiple explanations for why he thought this was a good idea, and I have read all of them, and not a single one has convinced me. If I were standing on the bank of a river in the Persian desert and someone suggested burning the boats, I would suspect him of being a Persian spy. The army retreated, constantly harassed by Persian forces the whole way back, and Julian was killed by a spear during one of the skirmishes. Actually, his wound wasn't fatal. The doctor did everything he could. He moistened the wound with wine to clean it. But in the end, the man died. And here's the part I love. Possibly apocryphal, probably embellished, but absolutely legendary. And as he lay dying, he allegedly caught his own blood in his hands, threw it at the sky, and said, "You have won, Galilean," meaning Jesus Christ, meaning Christianity wins. Whether that actually happened or not, someone wrote it down and it became the story, and honestly, real or not, that's a good story. His army then gave up major territory to get home. The whole thing collapsed. And finally, the one I have to mention, even though he technically doesn't belong here. Crassus. Marcus Licinius Crassus. Not a Roman emperor. Rome didn't even have emperors yet in his time. He was part of the first triumvirate with Julius Caesar and Pompey. But hear me out. If things had broken differently, if Crassus had survived, I genuinely think he makes a real run at total power. He was the richest man in Rome. Enormous political connections. The ambition, clearly. The problem is he also had this burning need to prove himself militarily, because Caesar had his military reputation and Pompey had his, and Crassus was sitting there going, "I'm just the money guy." That's it. So in 53 BC, he marched into Parthia, same general region as basically everyone else on this list, because apparently there was a cursed patch of desert that Roman commanders simply could not stop visiting, against the advice of nearly everyone who knew anything, and got absolutely cooked at the Battle of Carhae. Army destroyed. His son killed in front of him on the battlefield. And then Crassus was captured during the peace negotiations and taken to the Sasanian camp. But the ending. According to multiple ancient sources, the Parthians poured molten gold into his mouth to execute him, as symbolism, because he was so famously, almost cartoonishly obsessed with wealth. Is that true? It is not certain whether this is true. Do you think this is very cruel? Do you remember who Crassus was? That famous Crassus who brutally suppressed the Spartacus slave revolt and crucified the slaves he captured. But even if some ancient writer made that part up, the fact that it became the story, that this was the death people attached to Crassus, says everything. A man so associated with greed that when he died, people went, yeah, gold in the mouth, that checks out, very him. If Crassus had survived Carrhae, Roman history looks completely different. Maybe he becomes the dominant figure of the triumvirate. Maybe Augustus never happens the way it did. Maybe we're talking about a completely different set of emperors dying in completely different, embarrassing ways. But he didn't. He died in the desert with his mouth allegedly full of molten irony. If Caesar had been in Crassus's place, would he have been defeated too? Perhaps the legend of Caesar would have collapsed before it even began. Rome was genuinely something else, man.